Have you ever asked yourself why your life keeps repeating the same painful chapter, no matter how you pray or change your efforts? What if the reason the page won't turn is not about what you do, but about who moves with power inside you? Friends, hear me now. If you are tired of rearranging furniture on the deck of your ship while a storm rages, it is time to invite a tempest-changing power to board and rewrite the map. Tonight, I want to speak to the place in you that has been silently pleading for a miracle, but has settled for explanations. This message is not religion about formulas. It is an encounter with authority. It is not merely motivation to try harder. It is revelation that shifts identity. Many of us carry scars like medals and call them experience. But God says those scars were preparatory markers for a miracle. Spiritual power does not simply add capacity to your weak will. It transforms the narrative center of your life, so that the past no longer dictates the script. When spiritual force touches the inner man, your language changes, your decisions change, and the atmosphere around you begins to obey a new command. Listen closely. Power doesn't just remove problems, it repatterns destiny. You could spend a lifetime polishing strategies, collecting mentors, and rearranging routines, and yet remain stuck. Because there is a threshold most never cross. There is a spiritual climate that must be entered, a posture the heart must adopt, and a practical obedience that invites an unmerited visitation. This is not about performance, it is about posture. A posture that humbles ambition and elevates dependence. If you want your story changed, not cosmetically, but fundamentally, you must be willing to trade control for communion. You must become a person who not only prays for change, but becomes available for transformation. And there is one surprising, almost scandalous requirement to step into this power, one that the comfortable seldom accept and the desperate often discover. What is that posture? Now, the posture of surrender is the birthplace of true spiritual power. Every man or woman who ever walked in divine authority learned one unchanging secret. Before God entrusts power, He demands control. The reason many believers pray endlessly and see little transformation is not that God has ignored them. It is that they have invited Him to participate, not to preside. Surrender is the moment when you stop asking God to bless your plans and instead invite Him to rewrite them entirely. It is the point where your will ceases to compete with His and begins to cooperate with heaven's design. When you surrender, you are not quitting life. You are transferring ownership. You recognize that life in your own hands is limited by experience, emotion, and logic, but life in God's hands is guided by eternity's blueprint. Think of Abraham asked to leave everything familiar for a promise he could not yet see. Surrender began with a simple step of obedience that felt like loss, but became the foundation of legacy. Think of Mary, told she would carry the impossible. Her question was not, why me? But be it unto me. That is the posture that moves God. Heaven does not release power to the proud. It entrusts it to the yielded. Surrender is not an emotional moment in worship. It is a continuous decision to trust God beyond understanding. It is easy to lift your hands in a song and call it surrender, but true yielding begins when God's instruction interrupts your comfort, when He tells you to forgive that person who hurt you deeply, to walk away from a toxic pattern, or to give when it feels inconvenient. That's where power begins to flow, because power does not come to decorate convenience, it comes to validate obedience. The Holy Spirit does not manifest in full authority through a person who still argues with divine direction. He fills vessels that have stopped resisting. And here is the mystery. The very thing we fear losing in surrender is what God multiplies. The moment you surrender your time, He redeems your years. When you surrender your ambition, He redefines your purpose. When you surrender control, He gives you peace that no strategy could buy. Every great revival begins in the soil of personal surrender. One heart, one yes, one broken will saying, Lord, have your way. The strength of a believer is not measured by how much they can control, but by how much they can yield. Because surrender is not weakness. It is divine wisdom in disguise. But the enemy understands how dangerous surrender is. He knows a yielded believer becomes unstoppable, so he deceives us with partial obedience. He whispers, keep some for yourself, don't let go entirely. And many live in a state of negotiation with God, offering pieces of their lives while protecting the areas they trust him least. Yet God does not anoint fragments. He anoints fullness. The oil flows where the vessel is empty. Power responds to total availability. When you finally say, God, take it all, something breaks open in the unseen realm. Heaven takes that invitation seriously. And here is where the transformation begins. Surrender attracts the presence of God. The Holy Spirit is gentle. He does not compete for space. When he finds a life that is uncluttered by pride, by control, by self-preservation, he rests there. That presence begins to rewrite your instincts, your desires, your priorities. You start to love what he loves and resist what he resists. Soon your life ceases to be a performance and becomes a partnership. You no longer chase blessings. Blessings chase alignment. Power begins to flow not through striving, but through resting in divine will. So tonight, ask yourself, what areas of your life still resist divine control? Where do you still negotiate with obedience? Because as long as there is resistance, there will be limitation. True change begins the moment you stop fighting for your version of the story and let God author his. That's when you stop trying to change situations and start changing atmospheres. That's when spiritual power stops being a theory and becomes an experience. But surrender is only the door. Beyond it lies something far more defining. What happens when your identity itself begins to change under the weight of that surrendered power? Because once you yield, heaven not only moves through you, it renames you. And that, my friend, is where the next revelation begins. Before God gives a man influence, he first repairs his identity. Because no matter how much power flows through you, if you do not know who you are in him, you will misinterpret every miracle and mishandle every moment. Identity is the root from which influence grows. Many believers cry for elevation, not realizing that promotion without identity is destruction in disguise. Before you can represent heaven publicly, you must be grounded privately in who you are. From the very beginning, the enemy's first attack was never on Adam's possessions. It was on his identity. If you eat this, you will become, Satan suggested. Adam was not yet enough. Centuries later, when Jesus stood in the wilderness, the same voice whispered, if you are the Son of God. Notice the pattern? The enemy does not fear your fasting, your eloquence, or your plans. He fears your revelation of who you already are. Because the moment you know it, manipulation loses power. You stop reacting to opinions and you start responding to purpose. Identity in God is not built on titles or applause. It is built on revelation. What God has spoken about you in his word. Before Jesus healed, preached, or performed a miracle, heaven first declared, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. That affirmation came before any achievement. The Father settled identity before influence. The reason many crumble under pressure is because they chase validation instead of revelation. They need people to confirm what God already finished. But when you are rooted in divine identity, you can be misunderstood and still stay focused, rejected, and still remain fruitful. You must understand, spiritual power does not just flow to identity, it flows through identity. God does not anoint who you pretend to be. He anoints who you truly are. You cannot fake alignment and expect authority. Many are performing versions of themselves. God never called them to be. They preach from ambition, sing from insecurity, serve from comparison, and wonder why the heavens seem silent. But once you stand in your true identity, your spirit becomes magnetic. Heaven recognizes its own reflection and releases power accordingly. When you know who you are, you no longer pray like a beggar. You decree like a son. You no longer approach life hoping for permission. You move with confidence born from revelation. You stop asking, can God use me? And start declaring, God is moving through me. The battlefield of destiny is not always external. It is internal. Every time you doubt your worth, you delay your witness. Every time you believe a lie about yourself, you empower the liar and weaken your authority. And identity does not only protect you, it transforms how you treat others. Because when you are secure in who you are, you don't compete. You stop trying to outshine and start helping others shine. True sons of the kingdom are not intimidated by another's success. They celebrate it because they know their assignment is unique. The revelation of identity delivers you from jealousy, comparison, and striving. It sets you free to love, to serve, to lead without fear of losing yourself. But here's the secret. Identity is not found in introspection. It is discovered in intimacy. The more time you spend in His presence, the more you see yourself clearly in the light of His glory. Your false layers peel away. You begin to realize that you are never meant to live for approval. You are created to live from acceptance. You stop performing for love and start operating from it. So before you pray for greater influence, pause and ask, do I truly know who I am? Because if you skip identity, influence will destroy you. The platform will amplify your confusion. But if identity comes first, influence becomes effortless. It's no longer about proving yourself. It's about expressing Him. And yet, even identity, no matter how strong, must be activated in an atmosphere that gives it voice. Because identity alone is revelation, but without faith, it remains dormant. The next dimension of power is birthed when revelation meets expectation. And that, my friend, leads us into the next mystery. Faith is not merely believing that God can. It is living like He will. It is more than a confession. It is a climate, a spiritual atmosphere that either attracts heaven or repels it. Every great move of God begins not with opportunity, but with expectancy. You cannot host divine power in a heart filled with doubt, fear, or indifference. God moves where He is anticipated, not where He is analyzed. Expectant faith is the invisible fragrance that draws the presence of God like a magnet draws metal. Many believers pray, but few expect. They lift their requests with their lips, but lower them with unbelief in their hearts. And yet Jesus said, according to your faith, be it unto you. That means what manifests in your life is not determined by God's capacity. It is determined by your expectation. Heaven is not waiting for new decrees. It is waiting for new belief. Every time you pray with genuine expectation, you build a bridge between the invisible and the visible. Expectant faith is not blind optimism. It is anchored conviction. It is not pretending problems don't exist. It's knowing they cannot have the final word. When you live in this posture, your atmosphere shifts. The same space that once echoed fear now vibrates with assurance. Your words start to carry weight because they are no longer empty wishes. They are declarations forged in conviction. The woman with the issue of blood didn't just hope Jesus might heal her. She said within herself, if I can just touch the hem of His garment, I shall be made whole. That statement of faith created her miracle's atmosphere before the miracle happened. Faith is not only an internal state, it's an environment you cultivate. You must guard what surrounds you. Your words, your associations, your focus. Doubt is contagious, but so is faith. Surround yourself with voices that reinforce your belief, not ones that dilute it. Even Jesus removed doubters from the room before raising Jairus' daughter. He understood the wrong atmosphere can abort the right miracle. If the Son of God needed an environment of expectancy, how much more do we? Faith transforms ordinary spaces into sanctuaries of power. When you expect God to move, every prayer meeting becomes a holy ground. Every car ride a tabernacle. Every moment an opportunity for encounter. You begin to see life through a supernatural lens. Nothing feels random because you sense purpose behind every event. Expectancy doesn't manipulate God. It aligns you with Him. It tunes your spirit to His frequency so that when He speaks, you respond instantly. And understand this, faith is not static. It grows. It is strengthened through hearing, through obedience, through repeated remembrance of God's faithfulness. When you recall his past deliverance, your atmosphere fills again with hope. Every testimony is an oxygen tank for your faith. The devil knows this. That's why he attacks your memory. He tries to drown you in today's fear so you forget yesterday's victory. But the believer who remembers remains unstoppable. To maintain the atmosphere of expectant faith, you must learn the discipline of prophetic speech. Speak as though what God promised is already materializing. Call things that are not as though they were, not to impress, but to align reality with revelation. Words are not cheap in the kingdom. They are spiritual building blocks. What you consistently declare, you eventually experience. And here's the paradox. When faith becomes your atmosphere, waiting no longer feels like delay. It feels like preparation. You stop panicking over timing because you sense that something holy is forming behind the scenes. You start waking up every morning saying, this could be the day my story changes. That mindset itself becomes a prophetic seed. Heaven responds to expectation. Angels move in the direction of anticipation. But expectancy alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by action. Faith without obedience is noise. Faith with obedience becomes movement. The next realm of transformation unfolds when you stop just believing and start acting. When faith steps out into the unknown and challenges the limits of habit. Because while faith changes the atmosphere, obedience changes the outcome, and that leads us into the next revelation. Obedience is the master key that unlocks what prayer alone cannot. You can fast, worship, and declare scriptures, but until your actions align with God's instructions, your transformation remains incomplete. Power does not just respond to belief, it responds to compliance. Heaven's authority flows through order, and order begins with obedience. Every time God gives an instruction, he hides a miracle inside it, and every time we hesitate, we delay the manifestation of that miracle. Many believers love revelation, but resist responsibility. They want the prophecy, but not the process, the crown, but not the cross. Yet, if you study the Bible carefully, every breakthrough was born from obedience. Noah built an ark before the rain came. Abraham left his home before the direction was clear. Peter cast his net again. Even after a night of failure, their obedience was inconvenient, unreasonable, and uncomfortable. But it was that very obedience that triggered heaven's response. Obedience is not about understanding everything. It's about trusting the one who sees everything. Often, God's instructions come disguised as inconvenience. He will ask you to give when you feel empty, to forgive when you feel justified, to move when you feel unprepared. That's because obedience is designed to break the limits of your reasoning and invite you into the dimension of faith. If God only asked you to do what made sense, you would never grow. But when he asks you to step beyond logic, he is inviting you into partnership with the supernatural. And here is the mystery. Obedience breaks habits that prayer cannot. You cannot pray away disobedience. You must act your way out of it. Some cycles in your life persist, not because the devil is strong, but because your will is stubborn. Every time you delay what God told you to do, you strengthen the chain that holds you. But when you act, when you move, when you yield, the power of that habit begins to crumble. Because obedience is not just compliance, it is deliverance. Each yes to God loosens the grip of bondage on your soul. You see, habits are spiritual patterns. They are like invisible grooves in your spirit that keep pulling you toward the familiar. The only force strong enough to rewrite those grooves is consistent obedience. When you start obeying God in small things, you train your spirit to trust him in greater things. The same God who asks for small steps is preparing you for massive leaps. Never underestimate the power of one act of obedience. It may be the hinge on which your entire destiny turns, but obedience also tests motive. Do you obey because you trust God or because you expect a reward? True obedience flows from love, not transaction. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. Love obeys even when it costs. Love obeys even when it hurts. When your obedience is birthed from love, it becomes worship, and worship invites power. God cannot resist a heart that obeys him without negotiation. Some of the most powerful spiritual moments happen quietly when no one is watching. When you decide to delete that number, walk away from that sin, sow that seed, or reconcile that relationship. Those small choices echo loudly in the spirit. Angels record them, atmospheres shift, and heaven releases strength for your next season. Every act of obedience becomes a brick in the foundation of spiritual power. And yet, obedience is not a one-time event. It is a lifestyle. You don't graduate from it. You grow deeper in it. As God elevates you, his instructions become more precise. The greater your assignment, the stricter your alignment must be. You cannot walk in apostolic authority with casual obedience. Power demands precision. So pause and ask yourself, what has God already told me to do that I keep postponing? Because your next breakthrough is waiting on the other side of that instruction. God's power does not move toward your wishes. It moves toward your obedience. The moment you act, you authorize heaven to intervene. But there's another dimension, one that confuses many believers. What happens when obedience invites pressure instead of relief? When doing right makes life harder before it gets better? Could it be that obedience is not meant to spare you from pressure, but to prepare you through it? Because sometimes the storm is not a punishment, it's a classroom, and that revelation leads us straight into the next mystery. Pressure is not proof that God has abandoned you, it is evidence that he is preparing you. Every man or woman who has carried true spiritual power has first been processed through pressure. Before the oil flowed from the olive, it was crushed. Before the diamond gleamed, it was buried in darkness. Before Jesus was glorified, he endured Gethsemane. Pressure in the hands of God is never wasted. It is the holy machinery that shapes your character to sustain your calling. We often pray for promotion, but rarely for preparation. We want the public victory without the private refining. Yet God, in his wisdom, will not give you what you are not yet built to handle. He loves you too much to let your influence rise faster than your integrity. So he allows seasons of stretching, silence, and even suffering, not to destroy you, but to strengthen what your destiny will demand. Every delay, every disappointment, every unanswered prayer becomes a tool in his workshop. The very things you think are breaking you are, in truth, building you. Pressure reveals authenticity. It exposes whether your faith is rooted in emotion or conviction. Anyone can worship when the light is bright and the doors are open. But what do you say when heaven seems quiet? When you obeyed God and the result was not applause but opposition? When you prayed and nothing changed except the fire around you? That is the testing ground of destiny. Pressure strips away pretense. It forces you to depend on God beyond convenience. It removes the illusion of control and refines your trust until all that remains is pure faith. Sometimes pressure is God's answer in disguise. You asked him for power, so he gave you resistance. Because resistance builds strength, he will hide your anointing inside adversity so that when you finally emerge, no man can claim they made you. Pressure produces endurance, and endurance produces stability. A believer who has been through pressure no longer panics in storms. They've learned the rhythm of divine silence. They've discovered that just because God isn't speaking doesn't mean he's absent. Sometimes the teacher is silent during the test. In pressure, God develops the muscles of discernment. You learn the difference between delay and denial, between testing and punishment. You discover that not every closed door is rejection. Some are preservation. He uses pressure to mature your perspective. You start seeing life not as a series of random hardships, but as intentional training. You realize that the crushing was necessary to release fragrance. Without Gethsemane, there is no resurrection morning. Without the wilderness, there is no throne. And when you embrace this truth, you stop despising your seasons of struggle. You begin to thank God for the pain that purified you, the rejection that redirected you, you, the pressure that pushed you into prayer. You stop measuring your worth by how comfortable life feels and start valuing how Christ-like you're becoming, because the goal of pressure is not punishment, it's preparation for weight. God will always test the structure before he fills it with glory. Think of Joseph. The pit was pressure, the prison was pressure, but both were preparation for the palace. Each level of pressure trained his spirit to handle promotion without pride. Think of Moses. 40 years in the wilderness was pressure, yet that same wilderness forged the meekness needed to lead a nation. If you're under pressure today, it may be because heaven is rehearsing you for something heavy. The greater the oil, the greater the crushing. So the next time life presses you, don't rush to escape it. Ask, Lord, what are you forming in me through this? Because when the process is complete, you will carry a fragrance that only pressure can produce. You speak with authority that only pain can teach. Pressure doesn't just prepare you for influence, it prepares you for endurance. But there's one more truth you must see. Pressure prepares you, yes, but preparation always leads to purpose. God never trains a soldier who will not be sent. The end of pressure is not survival, it's commissioning. Once he refines you, he releases you. Once he shapes you, he sends you. So the question now becomes, after all this preparation, what are you being prepared to do? And that, my friend, takes us into the final revelation. There comes a point in every believer's journey where transformation must turn into transmission, where what God has done in you begins to flow through you. This is the realm of prophetic activation and commission. Everything God has taken you through, your surrender, your discovery of identity, your cultivation of faith, your obedience under fire, and your endurance through pressure has been preparing you for this moment. The process was never random. It was prophetic. Heaven does not train vessels it will not use. Activation begins when you realize that you are not waiting for permission to move. You are waiting for alignment to manifest. Too many believers keep asking, Lord, when will you use me? While heaven keeps replying, the moment you yield, you are already being used. God's power does not rest only on pulpits. It flows wherever obedience stands ready. When you understand this, you stop chasing platforms and start carrying presence. The true mark of prophetic activation is not visibility, it is usefulness. You are sent not to be seen, but to serve. When the Spirit activates you, he does not just give you words, he gives you burdens. Suddenly, you begin to sense divine weight for people, places, and purposes. You start to discern assignments in ordinary situations. You feel compelled to pray, to speak, to act in ways that carry eternal significance. That is prophetic awareness awakening inside you. You become an ambassador of heaven, walking among men yet operating under a different government. Every word, every action becomes a potential tool in the hand of God. But prophetic activation requires sensitivity. The same Spirit who fills you also directs you. This is why you must cultivate the discipline of stillness. Prophetic people are not noisy. They are discerning. They don't move because of pressure. They move because of prompting. You must learn to recognize the gentle nudge of the Spirit, that inner whisper that says, go there, or speak now, or wait. The supernatural is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's hidden in the quiet obedience of the moment. And understand this, activation without character leads to corruption. The gifts of the Spirit may draw attention, but only the fruit of the Spirit sustains authority. God will not send you where your integrity cannot keep you. That's why the crushing came before the commissioning. He had to make sure the vessel could carry the oil without leaking. When the prophet Elisha received Elijah's mantle, he didn't start by preaching. He started by serving. He poured water on the hands of his master, because service is the first expression of activation. Once you're activated, the world around you begins to respond differently. You'll notice divine coincidences, doors opening, hearts softening, opportunities aligning. It's not luck, it's the ripple effect of your obedience. Heaven starts coordinating circumstances around your assignment. Suddenly, People who need what you carry begin to find you. This is what it means to walk in commission. You are not wandering aimlessly. You are walking on divine appointment. Commission means you are sent, but not alone. The same power that trained you now travels with you. God does not send you and stay behind. He goes in you and before you. Every true commission carries divine backing. When you speak, it is no longer just your voice. It is the echo of heaven. When you lay hands, it is no longer just your touch. It is the extension of His. You become a living conduit of divine energy, a walking altar in motion. And yet here lies the greatest secret of all. Prophetic activation is not the end. It is a cycle. Every time you step out in obedience, God expands your assignment. Every miracle births a new mission. Every encounter births a new calling. The more you pour out, the more He pours in. You realize that your life is not your own. It's a continuous flow of divine intention through human availability. So now, as you stand at the edge of your own commission, heaven whispers one final question. Will you go? Will you carry the power that changed your story into the lives of others still trapped in theirs? Because spiritual power was never meant to make you comfortable. It was meant to make you a carrier. You are not the end of the story. You are the continuation of God's movement on earth. And as you step into that divine calling, remember, this is not the end of your transformation. It is the beginning of your influence. For every story that is changed through you becomes a testimony that echoes back to heaven. And perhaps even now the Spirit is asking you, who will be changed because you said yes?